Thank you for joining us in this panel. Very hard theme, very hard subject for this panel. Actually, weapons of informational warfare. But as you can see, as the subject is very hard, very deep, a panel of, I think the only one here in these 2 days of conferences that is consisted of most of the women experts. So I will make some presentations. So I'm very comfortable with this. Let me be very sincere with you, because also women in information warfare, hybrid warfare, and you'll see our panelists today are extremely prepared and have a high level of expertise. So we'll have also the voice of the women here, and I will start to present myself. I'm Ileana ROTARU. I am a university professor of West University of Timisoara, and also a senior expert of a New Strategy Center for several years. And to be affirmative in our gender policy today in our panel, I will start with Mr. MIKLAUCIC. He is a senior fellow of Irregular Warfare Center in United States and also an advisor to École de Guerre in France and the Institute for State Effectiveness. He is also an academia representative of University of Chicago and University of Sao Paulo. But after his retirement of 40 years of activity in different departments of US government like USAID, State Department, and Department of Defense. Thank you, Mr. MIKLAUCIC, for joining us today. And we hope we'll have plenty of time and vibrant discussions in our presentation together with our women colleagues here. So don't be shy.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to provide the gender balance.
The affirmative policies.
I'm also very at ease with this particular balance. No problem from my point of view. I'm a bit of an outlier on this panel, and this is why. My recent work has not been so much on the latest developments in Russian disinformation, but more on the development of a toolkit of offensive cognitive warfare weapons that we can use. This is inspired by US Cyber Command's programs of Hunt Forward and Defend Forward, which are an attempt to move the security perimeter in cyber warfare out from the United States, and in the case of Hunt Forward, to include our partners and allies behind that cyber security perimeter. We don't have such a thing in information warfare. And
one moment, sorry for interrupting, but I would like to present all our panelists, and then I will turn back turn back to you.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
Don't worry, don't worry. Then I will go to Mrs. Charlotte FREIHSE. I hope I pronounced correct with my German. Yeah. She is the co-lead of Digitalization and the Common Good of Bertelsmann Stiftung in Germany, and an expert on projects that focuses on digital sphere, and she is also a designer. I like very much this expression, a designer of proposals and recommendations for different stakeholders in relation with disinformation. Thank you for joining us, Charlotte. Then I'll move to our other panelist, Mrs. Svitlana KOVALCHUK. She's an executive director of Yalta European Strategy and actively involved in international project of YES and Victor Pinchuk Foundation, and she is focusing on topics on world agenda for Ukraine, like YES annual meetings, World Economics Forum, and Munich Security Conference. Thank you for being here today. And the last, but one of my best friends, as I have friends ever that I can have here in academia and the renowned expert in Romania, Professor Alina Bergăoanu. She's also a senior expert of New Strategy Center, but also the Dean of Faculty of Communication and Public Relations of National School of Political Science and Public Administration in Romania. And for many, many years already, Alina, she's a renowned, as I said before, a renowned expert in disinformation and strategic communication, and member of high-level EU groups. I will name some of her last activities and groups membership of hybrid threats, including disinformation, European Digital Media Observatory, and communication and health literacy. Thank you, Alina, and it's a pleasure again to be here with you today.
Thank you, and looking forward to the discussions.
So we're going back to our introductory input for our panelists, and I will go back to Mr. MIKLAUCIC. I hope I didn't upset you somehow. Because the question, let's say general question that I will ask also our panelists to try to answer is what can be said new about information warfare? And how this information ecosystem, because we are talking about many, many years already, I feel I'm getting old about talking about information warfare. But again, information warfare is developing, is evolving, is transforming in terms of actors, in terms of process, in terms of content. And what can be added as novelty, as new in the information war, and how can be this subject addressed today in 2026? After electoral years, after elections, in politics, in new pressures regarding the, let's say, long-lasting war in Ukraine, the new war in Iran, and all the other pressures that are, let's say, more visible and have been added to our informational ecosystem. Professor MIKLAUCIC.
Thank you.
MIKLAUCIC.
Sorry you have jumped the gun. I'm just happy to be here. What's not new in discussions about disinformation is the idea that our response has to be resilient, reactive, defensive. The discussions that I've been in for the last 10 years really have been about how we have to attain media literacy, how we have to detect, expose, and shame Russia for its disinformation efforts. With the, I think, slightly diluted optimism that somehow that will deter Russian disinformation efforts in the future. Deterrence by denial. But I don't see that it has been effective because it imposes no cost on Russia. The cost of information operations is very low. So if one doesn't work, another can be tried. That's what I'm trying to get at with my current work, which I call Fight Forward. I think developing an offensive, non-reactive toolkit for our use against our adversaries is a new element in disinformation. But I actually want to showcase some work done by an organization that I'm affiliated with in Sofia, Bulgaria, called the Center for the Study of Democracy. And I'll begin with a parable. The parable, this is something new to me, and the parable is taken from the epic trilogy by the Chinese science fiction author Cixin Liu called The Three-Body Problem, in which he describes a situation in which an alien civilization from a distant galaxy whose planet is imploding decides that they want to occupy the Earth and replace humanity. But their strategy for doing it is very clever. It's not just to beat us with better weapons. It is to infect our knowledge ecosystem with false and erroneous information so that our attempts to develop sophisticated responses to their technology continue to fail. The algorithms don't add up because they've infected bad math into our system. Why is this relevant? Knowledge is not always right. For thousands of years, the common knowledge was that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that knowledge prevented all of the scientific progress that has happened since the Copernican revolution. Knowledge is not always right. What the recent study by the Center for the Study of Democracy calls Pravda's Web shows how Russia has used a web of a network of static websites to saturate the web space with false and misleading information. This is a part, if you remember, 2 years ago, the French anti-disinformation agency Viginim exposed Portal Combat. This is a sub-ecosystem of Portal Combat. And the idea was to build, and effectively did build, for Bulgaria. This is a Bulgarian case study, a bot-based ecosystem publishing up to 6,000 pro-Kremlin propaganda articles per month. 6,000 pro-Kremlin articles per month consisting of, on a network of cookie-cutter static websites that lack any of the kind of human user interactions that we've come accustomed to, leading to the conclusion that these are actually websites meant to be conducive to web crawlers and other kinds of engines that collect information, not for human use. Their simplicity, their staticness, their one-dimensionality is highly conducive to bot-to-bot interactions, such as accelerated reproduction, intensive dissemination, and amplification. So what they're doing is they're manipulating search engine and web crawler algorithms to increase the visibility and the rankings of their stories. There are thousands of stories that are gleaned from Russian-influenced or Russian-owned channels that are stored in this Pravda web, which becomes a central hosting point for extensive pro-Kremlin and propaganda deliberately designed for easy scraping and automatic copying to other platforms, not for human interaction. And anyone who knows anything about advertising realizes that constant repetition, again and again and again, will persuade you eventually that oranges cause cancer, or that Crimea has always been part of Russia, or that there is no such thing as Ukraine. It is just a part of Russia. If it's repeated often enough, you will eventually even hear those talking points in the United States Congress and maybe in your own organizations as well. This is creating a highly vulnerable attack surface for a very sophisticated and massive effort to control and shape the information environment, specifically in Bulgaria. But I suspect that the study would have similar findings if done in Romania or certainly in the United States. I'm just going to say one other thing about it, which is that the only conclusion that I found, I mean, everybody now uses LLMs to do research, right? I mean, we used to, whenever we had a question, we would ask Google. Now we ask ChatGPT, or we ask Gemini or Claude. And whatever the answer is, we assume that that is the right answer. That's the sea that we're swimming in. We assume it's right. But recent episodes have shown, especially in court documentation, that ChatGPT will create false citations, false cases, and American judges have truly castigated lawyers for doing that. But my point is zero trust. The same as in our cyber systems, don't trust everything you read. My last comment before I pass the microphone is Russia is not the only challenge here. China is getting really, really good at this too. and I'll highlight some work done by two colleagues at Vanderbilt University on a Chinese AI company called Golaki that has compiled massive, highly granular profiles of 2,000 American thought leaders, politicians, journalists, including 177 members of Congress, with which they can micro-target influence campaigns based on detected, known preferences, choices, and habits. So it's not just Russia. China is also a challenge. That's new to me.
Thank you very much, Mr. MIKLAUCIC. I don't know, Alina, Charlotte, Svitlana. What is new? Or what is new or the novelty of the information warfare?
I thank you, first of all, for having me here, especially at this panel about Russian information warfare, because it is what really matters for Ukraine, because our Ukrainian experience shows that information warfare is not any more supportive tool. It's entire system of Russian weapons, which is part of diplomatic strategy, military strategy, political strategy. Information warfare became part of our daily life, because even when we wake up, we now in Ukraine, we are not sure it's a real news or it's fake news. It's a real story or it's not real story, because we already used to be disinformed, even what is going on the front line, what is going on in another city. Is it right that this or that city was again attacked? Is it right that nuclear power plant is occupied now by Russia? Is it in Russian hands or still it's Ukrainian hands? And what we got that actually Russia changed already strategy. Is several years ago, I would say when war started, and it is already 12 years ago, it was mostly about dissemination of the information, disinformation, and now we have new reality that what Russia is trying to do to spread distrust everywhere, to erode trust in institutions, in countries, in policies, in daily lives, in governments. Because in such way, you can be even more effective than on the front line, right? Disseminating some kind of not real information, you can influence public opinion, you can influence mood in the country, and of course you can influence election. Yeah, like speaking about election. Or what is very important for Ukraine and what we are fighting very actively on a daily basis, it's really erode trust in Ukraine and in Ukrainian war, because for my country it's important to get support from our partners, and we really, like my president, my government saying all the time that we're fighting on all fronts, on front line, on economic fronts, on information fronts, of course, and of course a big important has military support to Ukraine. And here we have to deal with Russian paradigm that military support to Ukraine will bring to non-ending war. And we have to deal it on a daily basis, because for us it's not only about non-ending war, it's for us a matter of survival, a matter of saving our countries, and of course what we are trying and what we're working with our partners, that Ukrainian security is security for the European country as well, because we're fighting not for ourselves, we're fighting for European countries as well. As it's like very bad story for my country, but as long as war will be at our territory, it will be not at another neighboring country, it's Baltic country or Poland or even Romania, right? But Russia is working with absolutely different paradigms. And of course, it's like entire ecosystem, and it's like changing and becoming bigger all the time. We all the time have to deal not only with chatbots, with bot farms, with, of course, Russian official news, unofficial news, but we have to deal also with the entire network of pro-Russian journalists, pro-Russian diplomats, actually pro-Russian lobbyists, which are all over the world. And it was not built during the last 5 or 10 years. It was built during the centuries. And you cannot counter it within 1 or 2 years. Yes, we are working on it. We became like laboratory of countering Russian warfare. And we now have our own strategy how to deal it. And what is good that my government could unite official efforts of civil society, efforts of medians, and also to work with people, because now everyone, even my nephew, knows that it's necessary to check every pictures you see in social media, because you know now, is it truth or it's facts? And of course it disappears. And what is also awful that Russia manipulates with situation at the front line, with victims, with soldiers. It influences every family. And I remember that at the beginning of the war, the influence was much more bigger than now, because now we learn how to react. It happens because everyone understands that Russian warfare is even more serious than situation in the front line, and you can combat it only if you unite all efforts. And it's very often that it happens that we have a military attack and then we have information attack, right? Like it happens in military attack on our energy infrastructure. In news, what we get that Ukraine bombarded itself, right? And we need to deal, we need to prove that it was not our drones, not our shaheds, that it's not us who destroying our energy infrastructure, that we are fighting against it. So my summary is very short. Everyone should fight against warfare because it's big, it became complex, and you're not all the time sure that it's truth, where it's fake.
Thank you, Svitlana. Thank you very much. Charlotte, Alina, what can Charlotte? Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. I think for us, like we've been working in this field for 5 years, and because you ask what's new, I think new is how we approach this topic maybe. So our research focus shifted on 2-3 things actually, to social media platforms, but also to data and AI infrastructure. And I actually wanted to start with a short story from Germany, which is, it's not fake, it's actually real. It happened 2 years ago. It's a leak. It's very established media outlets in Germany got leaked information about a so-called social design agency, a Russian company where around 100 people work. And what they do every day is they monitor media outlets in Germany. They monitor what our politicians say in public. They also monitor opinion leaders, in general discourse, how Germans think about topics and what they, more importantly, what they fight about. And what they then do is they identify the most controversial topics and then generate and execute disinformation campaigns. And I wanted to bring this example because in the same year, also 2 years ago, we had farmers' protests. I don't know if this is more national news in Germany, but it was really big. And these protests also have been used by Russian disinformation campaigns to make a link to the support, to the financial and military support of Ukraine. And what was also leaked is really interesting. It was actually on one PowerPoint slide, was the goals of this Russian company, what they actually wanted to do. And it was to raise the voters for the AfD, for the right-wing extremist party in Germany, by 20%. It was to increase Germans' fear of the future, and it was to spread the perception that Germany is in its biggest social and economic crisis since its beginning. And everything, or the constantly used narratives, were always linked to the support of the Ukraine. So they wanted to make sure that Germans think, I'm in an economic worse position because our government supports the Ukraine. And I wanted to share this also, not just to give you an example of what's happening in Germany and how this is linked to the war against Ukraine, but also because the ecosystem, like you said, behind that is so sophisticated. So we see not only bots spreading these campaigns, but also people working in these companies every day to create false accounts, to create, you probably have heard of the doppelganger campaign, a way that established media outlets' websites got copied and obviously faked, and then these false accounts, for example, see an article by Spiegel online, and then they comment on this article and try to divert people with a link to the fake websites. And with AI, or the like you said, the fact that AI technologies are so accessible, it makes this so much easier. And I'm not a military expert, but I think the similarity here in the Russian tactic is you need a lot of soldiers. Maybe they're not that trained, but they have a lot of them, and it's the same with disinformation. These campaigns are not very sophisticated. You are still able to recognize and consider them, but there are so many that it's getting very hard to, you know, to detect them. And so I talked about the ecosystem, and I think what is maybe not new, but I would like to bring as a message is, I think informational warfare is no longer a side element of conflict. At least in Russia, we see it's been used as a strategic instrument that's integrated not only in cyber attacks or military operations, but in political influence, in diplomacy, in a foreign policy architecture as a whole. And the objective is not necessarily, in my opinion, persuasion, is more, at least what we see from the campaigns in Germany, is confusion, polarization, and to erode trust and cohesion. So the end goal might be that nobody knows what's the truth anymore, that you don't trust the government, and maybe at best you don't trust, you know, the citizens around you. So maybe just a few key takeaways I would love to discuss and hear from your perspectives also. I think it's ongoing, and we have to focus more on long-term strategies, and in Germany at least efforts tend to increase during election times, and I think we have to not just think in election cycles and not just think in conflict cycles, but treat this topic as an ongoing challenge. And yes, we need to strengthen media literacy. We need to make sure that we have good media ecosystems that are independent, but also we have to increase transnational coordination. And I don't know how you think about that, but I hear this a lot. Also at these forums, we hear so many people saying we need more cooperation, but I think we have to have a debate about who sets up the structures for this coordinations, who puts resources into this coordination, who makes sure people have the time and the resources to connect with people from other countries, because these campaigns are not national. They have a local dimension, but they are executed in a transnational way. So how do we come by that? And last but not least, just because that's a bit of my background, I think we have to think more about the infrastructure dimension. We have to invest in digital technologies, made in Europe, and I know it's not an ICT infrastructure panel, but I think when we talk about a more holistic security architecture, we have to include that building a digital sovereign Europe that's less dependent on technology made in China, made in the US is very crucial. Maybe leaving it like that.
Thank you very much for the key points, Charlotte. Yes, we will go back to our takeaways, to your takeaways, because I also have some ideas. This morning there was a very nice syntagm that I have heard from our director of Department of National Cybersecurity that I liked very much, and I wrote it down. He said something like cybersecurity is a sports team. So probably about related to what you said, also acting or trying to destructure and understand the information warfare and came with the proactive measures is also and should be a sports team regarding the interconnectivity and transnational coordination. Professor Bergăoanu, please.
Very briefly, to answer to your question, what is new about the contemporary information warfare? I have become bored of what I have been saying for the last 10 years, that everything is new about the information warfare. And I think that the biggest mistake was to approach this new phenomenon with old intellectual tools, saying, oh, we have seen this kind of propaganda, it is something old with some social media features, and I think that this poisoned the whole debate and the whole response or policy response. So again, this is my intellectual viewpoint, that really, apart from some tactics, everything is new about the infrastructure in which contemporary propaganda is playing out. But what is really, really new, I think, I'm trying not to repeat myself, especially in this kind of high-profile forum. And I think there are some things that you have touched upon, so it is a good opportunity to reinforce them. So I think that what is really, really new, apart from the technological ecosystem, is how central information warfare is to diplomacy, as an instrument of diplomacy, and as an instrument of statecraft. This is why historical comparisons have limited value, because of course every warfare has been accompanied by efforts to disrupt public opinion or to build trust of public opinion, but now these kind of endeavors are central to diplomacy and are central to statecraft. So I think this is really new compared to other periods of history. Otherwise, we'll make very complacent comparisons. Oh, but also Napoleon said that we need to build public opinion trust. And for example, coming to very recent situations, I have come to the conclusion that it is easier, and I think that this is a pretty common conclusion. It is easier to instate a blockade, for example. It is easier to eliminate high military targets. It is easier to decapitate the entire leadership of a regime, for example. And it is not that easy to maintain the support of a public opinion, including the support of your closest supporters. The effort to build trust of public opinion for internal and for external audiences appears to be 10,000 more difficult than doing exquisite military actions. And I agree from this point of view with the assessment of the Trump administration that what has happened in the Middle East are exquisite military actions. But this is only half of the story. I would say probably less than half of the story. And again, this is a major realization for me in real life and in real time, that it is more difficult to maintain and to build trust of public opinion for internal audiences and for external audiences, including, again, for your closest supporters. I think that this is completely new. No matter how many comparisons we will look for in history, I don't think that we'll find such a situation when perfection, almost in kinetic actions, is not matched, not even close, with some approximation to build and to maintain the support of public opinion. So again, this reinforces your argument that it has become a central instrument of diplomacy and of statecraft. The second new thing is that is something that feeds into the title of our panel, Weapons of Information Warfare. I think that the main weapon of information warfare against Western audiences is our attention. I mean, this is the main weapon. And this is many times self-induced, because this kind of attention is engineered to react to certain things. So we are acting in this is a core feature of the contemporary public spaces in Western democracies, that they are attention-driven. And again, this is not something, people's attention is too small, let's scold people that they should pay more attention. But this is a technological thing, and to be more precise, this is an engineering thing. That the current contemporary spaces is not social media, because this kind of platformization logic has flown into mass media too, that they're attention-driven. And the algorithms are engineered in order to reward short-time attention, divisive speech, polarizing speech, and these are ranked higher in order to maintain our attention. So we are facing a hugely engineering problem, but of course the answer is not engineering in nature, it's not technological in nature, but it is both engineering, technological, social, psychological, and cultural at the same time. And the third thing, and I will close this formal remark, I think that what is really, really new in our Western democracies, liberal democracies, we can discuss the terms, is how embedded hostile influence narratives have become into domestic conversations. There is a lot of research, and there is a lot of discussion about what it is called FIMI. You are all familiar with the term, foreign information manipulation and interference. But I would make the extreme point that there is no such thing. There is only FIMI in combination with DIMI, with domestic information manipulation interference. So foreign interference and foreign influence doesn't come up as a spray which is thrown at our societies, and guess overnight we have discovered that there are some leaflets in our postal box offices. There is no such thing. But most of the time, I think that FIMI and DIMI reinforce each other with some digital echoes, to the point where the internal conversations are indistinguishable from the foreign influence. And I think that this is a very new development, and this creates a very difficult discussions in liberal democracies, how to deal with this, how to counter, what is protected by free speech, what can be clearly delimited as being FIMI. So again, centrality, what you have touched upon, attention-driven economy and attention-driven public spaces, and the embeddedness of foreign influence into domestic conversations.
Thank you very much, Professor Bergăoanu. Thank you very much, Alina. Yes, we have made some, let's say, mapping of the novelty in the information space, but there were some ideas, and I think some of them were not touched deeply enough. And I will propose to you again, because some of you sensed some messages in this case. How technology, especially AI, is transforming these weapons, this arsenal of weapons, and how is the public space being weaponized, and who is actually in charge for setting the public agenda in our informational environment. Is the Russian propaganda or Russian, let's say, initiatives? Is the national state initiative is a central type of developing, or I don't know, it's a competition between different stakeholders, non-statal actors, to set the public agenda with the help of AI technologies. So the public space, for example, in European Union member states can be considered a weaponized space, public space. Yes, of course, it's your turn.
That's right, gender balance. Before I address that, let me just, as you were talking, I thought again about what is new. I guess part of that depends on what do you mean by new? Are we talking about the last year? 5 years ago, who had ever heard of ChatGPT or large language models? 10 years ago, who had really thought, other than a few computer wizards, about artificial intelligence? So I would say that something that is quite new is, in the last 15, 20 years, is the fact that everybody is connected now. Everyone is online. This was never the case before. We have 6 billion mobile phone users in the world. At any one time, 1 billion people are online on the computer. That's new. Something else that's new, really new and very odd to me, is something called influencers. I never, when I was growing up, when I was trying to choose my career, that wasn't one of the options. I had never heard of influencers, but now there are people who have millions of followers, and I don't know why, but that exists now. So that's something that's a little bit new. And I just, if I may, I wanted Alina to say, you said that you think that information warfare as statecraft is new. Yes and no. Ecclesiastes tells us that there's nothing new under the sun. I was part of what I consider one of the most successful information warfare campaigns of the 20th century. I know we're now in the 21st century, but if some of you remember Project Democracy, which began in 1985 under President Ronald Reagan, the United States and its allies in Europe mounted a global campaign to flood the zone with information about how countries would be more prosperous and happier under democratic regimes. And it was an absolutely comprehensive campaign that used radio, television, print media, diplomacy, all of the tools, all of the elements of national strength and allied strength. And it brought down the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact. It brought down the ideology of communism. So it was a very effective statecraft use of information warfare, although we didn't describe it that way at the time. Now, retroactively, I feel that is what I was doing back in the 1980s and the 1990s. I think I'll pass it on to others, having said that.
Thank you. Charlotte.
So yes, I think, like I said before, AI technology especially, I think you touched this as well, it changes the way we produce and consume knowledge, and this has something to do with the information space. But, and of course it makes it easier and way faster to produce also fake content, orchestrated campaigns, but also we gain, like in theory at least, we gain tools that may help detect information, disinformation campaigns faster. I think the issue isn't per se the technology. I think it's more the power dynamics that we see are who produces or who develops these kind of technologies and who owns them. And I think this is the issue we see here. You talked about the attention economy, the way social media platforms are technically designed. They don't have to be designed that way, but platform owners gain money with us being on them for a very long time, so they gain ad revenue and so on. And the issue is that we don't have 200 platforms, we just have a few in the hands of a few people who then, of course, also design the rules for our public spaces, and this should not be designed by private companies. And but this is, I think, not something new, but it's just that people like Elon Musk, well, maybe for some people they changed their political view. I don't think so. I think Silicon Valley has always been very opportunistic, and it's just a different government now. But I wanted to say that technology is neutral. It's just what's not neutral is how we use it and who designs it and develops it. And I think this has become a bigger issue now for Europe, because this challenge of the information space, you said it's also a question of engineering. How do we react to campaigns that are so fruitful on social media platforms that benefit these campaigns? What do we do about that? And how do we, and this is maybe also a question for Michael, because you mentioned a good example for a campaign that's pro-democracy. Do we have to get better in coming up with campaigns that speak to people, that address people, counter narratives? Like, what's the role of democratic governments and actors in this information space? Where are visible voices, influencers who promote not anger, but a democratic lifestyle?
We have the case of the last elections in Republic of Moldavia, where the social media influencers actually turn or contribute a lot for pro-European party and sustain. And against the reverse medal was Romania, where we didn't see coming.
And you also, in Romania, you have the example of an election that had to be repeated because of European law. And this brings me to the last point. I think it's not only about promoting democracy campaigns, it's also about explaining policy better in Europe, in democratic societies. I mean, if we have a US government who's been targeting European regulation for social media platforms, framing it as censorship, that's so successful because we just lacked the opportunity to explain to European citizens why this rules makes the online experience safer. But if people don't understand what the policies, what the rules, how they affect their personal life, it gets very easy for non-democratic actors to get into these topics and offer a different narrative that speaks to emotions and that often, addresses people very, very well. This goes a little bit back from your technology question.
No, it was just a point that I would have. Of course, they are related, but I try to make some ideas. I will, because we have still 10 minutes, and I would like to have probably some audiences. I will go back to you, Svitlana and Alina. We know now what has been happening. We are tired of analyzing or trying to understand what is happening and what is coming to us. In EU, in European space, in European public space, in European enforcement law, in United States, and so on and so on. But I have been discussing with Alina earlier, and this is a question that we are asking ourselves, actually. We seem every time that we are waiting for something to happen, to wait those tsunamis, to wait those waves of coming, and you don't know what, or from where, or so on. So what can we do, because we always feel like we are one step behind, and what hasn't worked so far in this endeavor of ours to see and to understand our competitors, our adversaries, our enemies, and so on. Alina, I will ask Alina and then Svitlana.
Okay, so what hasn't worked? Yeah, and I think this also feeds into what you said about coming up with counter narratives of the main idea of what to do about it. There are many things that haven't worked, and probably my pessimism is tinted by the Romanian situation. I do not want to become too pessimistic, and I don't think that Romania is such an outlier, but I think that what has been happening in Romania for the past 10 years, let's say, is pretty representative for the whole transatlantic space. And again, we can have a whole discussion only about what hasn't worked. But in order to also fit the discussion about counter-narratives, I think that what hasn't happened, and it isn't happening, is that we do not acknowledge the thing that contemporary disinformation, information warfare, hostile influence, fills a huge communication void that is left by the decision makers. During the pandemic, this void was filled by people saying that, oh, we care for your feelings. So the disinformation actors provided people with the idea that they belong to a community, that somebody sees them and that they are not invisible. Hello, I'm here and I matter. This is one of the strongest reasons that is indicated by research why people engage with propaganda, disinformation, misleading information, false information, even knowing that that information has these kind of characteristics. So they do not care about the information as such, but they want to show somebody that they exist and that their life should be acknowledged. So I think that one huge mistake is, again, not to pay attention that disinformation actors, most of the time, have filled a huge communication and psychological void that was left by the people who were supposed to fill in that kind of void. And we have very, very concrete examples about the current public opinion in Romania, and I think that I hope that this will be a major takeaway, especially for our international guests. In Romania, according to public opinion polls, and not to public opinion polls, but to longitudinal measurements during for the past 6 years, shows that only 9% of the Romanians consider that EU is a defense actor. Only 9%, which is close to nobody. I mean, nobody in Romania, again exaggerating, takes the topic seriously that EU is a defense actor. This leaves a huge communication void to be filled with all kinds of ideas and interpretation that the EU is leaving, that the EU does not have the capacity, that there is a transatlantic clash between this. So if only 9% of the Romanians have EU as a defense sector on their mind, this is a huge communication void, which is a low-hanging fruit for hostile influence. And these are facts. I mean, these are not my interpretations. It's not about one public opinion poll, but again, it is about longitudinal belief measurements for the past 6 years. This is what every public poll in Romania shows consistently, that EU is not perceived as a defense actor. And again, this void is a low-hanging fruit for all kinds of misleading interpretations that are very familiar to all of you, that there is a transatlantic divide, that the US is abandoning us, that the EU does not have the capacity. I mean, really talking about the embeddedness of foreign influence into internal conversations. This is part of our internal conversations, because again, this has filled a void that nobody takes that framing seriously. Who is supposed to provide this framing? Of course, you cannot leave it to the NGOs, to the academic sector, but this is an instrument of statecraft at a national level and at the EU level. So very concrete things in order not to come up with the philosophy of mind, how mind works, but I think that we have to acknowledge that most of the time, probably all of the time, hostile influence actors filled communication voids that were left as voids by the people who are supposed to fill them with emotional content, with psychological support, with policy guidance, with the idea about how future looks like, with hope and with confidence.
Thank you, Alina. Yes, this is one of the questions we have been asking before. So what is happening in EU or in European space? Are we still a target? Are we still an experiment? Or a subject of the information warfare? Or we can try to lead the counteracting or strengthen our resilience? So, Svitlana.
Again, I would say from
How is the public space reinforced in Ukraine?
from Ukrainian side, counteracting against information warfare is possible, but what is necessary, we need to be active, rather active than proactive, than reactive. We need to have clear strategy. And of course, we need to be very, very quick, because now there is a very well-known saying, when light travels around the world, trust will still wear its trousers. So quickness and speed matters a lot. And what matters also coordination, because as I told previously, we really succeed to unite efforts of our governments, of our civil society, of our media representatives. Only if we are united and coordinate our efforts, we can be effective.
Thank you. Ms. MIKLAUCIC? You wanted to add something earlier, and I don't want to consider that.
You asked what hasn't worked, and I just wanted to say two things haven't worked. One is dismissing and ignoring the problem, which, at least in my government, at the highest levels, is a continual battle trying to persuade the Joint Staff or the policy part of the Pentagon, or let alone the White House, that information warfare is real warfare. And the other thing that hasn't worked is, and I mentioned it earlier, is deterrence by denial. It doesn't impose a high enough cost on our adversaries to deter them from persistent efforts to undermine our solidarity through information warfare. Those were the 2 points I wanted to make.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, what hasn't worked?
I think I can second that, Michael. I think what hasn't worked in Germany is a rather passive government in this area. We have a very strong civil society, a very good media ecosystem, but our government is, compared to, for example, France or Sweden, very careful in, for example, coming up with an institution, with an agency that tries to coordinate and that's actually active in detecting foreign influence operations. And I know from discussions with our Ministry of the Interior, which is in lead of countering disinformation in Germany. It's not the Federal Foreign Office, it's the Ministry of the Interior. They are very scared of being called a Ministry of the Truth, and I can understand that, but sometimes I feel you should rather, or it has not worked very well for them because they're being called this anyways. They should come up with a narrative again. What is the role of a democratic government in this field? What are the boundaries? What are the checks and balances? And how can a government find a more proactive approach in this? Is this really, how do we come up with a strategic, democratic form of communication maybe without, endangering freedom of speech, freedom of expression and all that. And I think it has not been worked very well for a lot of European governments to be too scared of doing something that could be labeled as censorship. It has been labeled anyways as censorship now by the US government, and
It was branded.
or branded. There's even like a document by the current administration where organizations and European regulation is noted. So yeah, I would wish for a better coordination, learn from your colleagues in France and in Sweden, and a more proactive communication of what a government's role in the information space and countering disinformation is and what's not, and make that accessible to people, make them understand, include them in discussions. I think the whole of the society is needed for this challenge, and but who is responsible to set this up is the government. So, yeah. I hope you are going to ask what has been successful as well, to not end on this.
Yeah, but I leave if there are some observations or some questions from the public. Yes, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ileana. I'm a political scientist. My question, of course, coming with a comment before, would be that, for example, elections in Romania were actually saved by the fact that we had strong institutions protecting liberal values, and the fundamental one was that votes by men are equally counted, as opposed to, well, bots that are these days setting the narrative for us. My question would be, would you say that it's also an asymmetric war because states are now fighting large platforms, and it's actually reinvention, let's say, of money against political power?
The question is addressed to a particular speaker, or
whomever would like to tackle it.
Actually, it's a symmetric war anyway. It doesn't matter. It's a state who has to react, or military unit, or some other parties or forces, or me or my colleagues like a person, because it's all about asymmetry when we speak about AI and new technologies.
Yes, and very shortly, it's asymmetric, and this fits into what I try to say, that it is central to statecraft, meaning that it is used by small state actors in exquisite forms against superpowers. This is what I meant by centrality of statecraft, that it is used by countries who punch way above their weight in order to paralyze big powers, really big powers economically, militarily, technologically. So I think that this is the biggest development of our time, that it is used asymmetrically by small or medium powers, again, countries that punch way above their economic, political, or technological weight. And about the Romanian elections, I think that annulling elections is an extraordinary event, that's for sure. I have been saying repeatedly that we shouldn't be too harsh on institutions that they didn't see it coming, because this is how influence is designed, not to be visible in the first place. It is invisible by design. That there were visible signs that weren't detected. This is another discussion. But I think that the main takeaway out of the Romanian annulled elections, they prove that influence is invisible by design, and that we should refine our measurements and our tools to detect public opinion. It is not we should increase our capacity to detect weak signals. No, it is our capacity to detect micro signals that can become exponential under the right circumstances. So this will be, I try to answer your comment and hopefully your question too.
Are there any other comments or questions that need to be asked? Yes, please.
Thank you. Richard Levay from the British Embassy here in Bucharest. We've been engaging quite a lot on this topic over the past year and beyond. My question is coming from the UK's increasingly got a emphasis on the disrupting side, so whether that's what Michael was saying about, you know, raising the costs to the information networks that are kind of conducting information warfare, whether that's through more aggressive measures or whether that's through things like sanctions and exposure. But I suppose my question is, what's your advice to the Romanian government at this moment. So we've had lots of talk about kind of a report on what happened, but not had anything released yet. So kind of what's your advice to the Romanian government at this stage in kind of how to handle the kind of slightly unanswered questions around what happened with the elections and going forward when it comes to taking a more disruptive approach?
A very, very short answer, if it's possible, because already the organizers are telling us that we are a little bit late. But we started later with 2 minutes, so I'm asking for my 2 minutes.
So really I'm not in a, it sounds a little bit patronizing if we put it like an advice, so I'm not in that position, but my professional suggestion, first one is framed in a negative way. I think that one of the biggest temptations which hasn't worked is to try to incorporate parts of the liberal speech, of the disinformation speech, into the mainstream. This has been disproven by social science repeatedly. I mean, this is like law of gravitation in social sciences, that by trying to incorporate parts of the disinformation in liberal anti-European speech into your main discourse, this only backfires and this only legitimizes the initial speech in the first place. So I think this is a temptation that should, excuse my normative term, but that this is how the question was framed. So I think that this temptation should be resisted at all costs. And again, this temptation has been disproven by social science research all over the transatlantic space. And second thing, my advice feeds into what I have just said. We should improve our capacity to detect weak or micro signals very, very early. Once things start to show up in public opinion polls, or in public sentiment social media listening schools, it is already too late and there is nothing much left to do about it. So disruption should come very, very early based on micro signals. And it's very difficult because the public space, which is technological in nature, functions according to exponential logic. So something which is very, very weak at some point can really explode under the right circumstances. And I think that the traditional public opinion measurements works in linear ways. 45% versus 55%, this is completely obsolete. So again, refining our capacity to detect micro signals and to trust people who are saying that this is a relevant micro signal, even if it is not detectable with your eyes open.
Thank you very much, Alina, and thank you also for your questions. We are running out of time, and I know that 2 minutes counts a lot in our panel. But I will not close the panel before I thank you all very much for joining and for making your time to discuss such an important subject. Thank you for joining our panel. Thanks for the audience to join our panel, our feminist panel, George. So, taking about information. And probably the next year, we will, if our organizers will let us again to have this kind of women gender balanced and total panel, we'll answer the next to our question, what has been successfully done to tackle disinformation since last year, yes. Thank you very much, and be prepared for our next panel. Thank you.